Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 375. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about bikes and canals and Van Gogh as we go to Amsterdam.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. This episode of the Amateur Traveler is sponsored by Audible.com. I'm going to recommend, since we're talking about Amsterdam and the Netherlands, and we'll be talking somewhat about Dutch masters, the book The Girl with a Pearl Earring, which is about the painter Vermeer. To get a free book from Audible.com, just go to amateurtraveler.com/freebook. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. In the first one, bad news if you're flying American Airlines. They're planning on adding more seats to their 737s and MD-80s, and that means less legroom. Speaking of somebody who needs legroom, the actor who played Chewbacca was stopped by TSA because he tried to sneak through with a lightsaber cane. It was a cane shaped like a lightsaber. It's not a real lightsaber. I'm not sure why that's a problem. And then an interesting study came out as TripAdvisor reached its 100 millionth review, and that is that Americans, 53% of them won't book a hotel room without checking the TripAdvisor reviews. And I think actually I'm in that 53%. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome back to the show Erik Smith, who's coming to us from On My Feet or InMyMind.com. Welcome back to the show, Erik.
Thanks for having me back, Chris.
And I say welcome back. Those of you who have been here for a while certainly recognize Erik's voice. This is your sixth time on the show, and we have come up with 5 shows that you've been on before: national parks, Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons, the Four Corners area, Michigan, and the South Island of New Zealand. So welcome back. What are we talking about this time?
We're talking about Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, excellent. And you were just in Amsterdam within the last couple weeks?
Yeah, I just got back from a 24-day trip where I trained all around Europe. And my first stop on the continent was in Amsterdam, and it was my first time there in a few years, and it was good to see that Amsterdam's just as fun and vibrant as I remember.
And you say your first time there in a few years, but not your first trip to Amsterdam.
No, no, no. I visited Amsterdam. I was trying to figure out exactly how many times. A couple of my Eurail trips, I went in and out of there a few different times, and it totaled probably about 50 or 60 days and 7 or 8 different visits in the last 15 years.
Now, Amsterdam was actually my first place that I went overseas.
Wow.
I didn't tell you that. And
Yeah.
and I say the first place I went, and yet we actually were, because it was our first place, we were intimidated by Amsterdam and some of its reputation. And so we really didn't see Amsterdam at times. So I've been back since. But why should people come to see Amsterdam?
I wouldn't feel bad about being intimidated by Amsterdam. Some of these trips I went with different people, and the classic Amsterdam story is one of the first few times I was in, I think it was my third time in, I brought a friend from Chicago I was living at the time, and he had never traveled overseas anywhere before, and we happened to arrive this is 1998 during the World Cup that was taking place in France. We happened to arrive during a Dutch national soccer game, and we went to our hotel, and the lady at the hotel was thoroughly annoyed with us for trying to check in during the World Cup game. She let us put our bags in the room, so we went out and walked a little bit of the city, and the Dutch managed to win the game late in the game in the 91st minute on a late goal, and the people just streamed into the streets wearing their orange, which is their color. And I remember it was fine when we were just walking around, the two of us, for the 15, 20 minutes while that was going on. But once the people got into the streets and started celebrating, I remember him and I getting ready to go through and just walk through the red light district to look at it, and him turning to me and saying, you know what, let's wait till tomorrow when it's light out. He just was very shell-shocked by Amsterdam. So I wouldn't feel bad about being intimidated by it. He also mentioned reputation. It does have a reputation, but I always tell people everything you've heard about Amsterdam is true, and it isn't true. It's got this reputation, and some of it's justified and some of it's blown out of
proportion. We should mention what the reputation is.
Well, the Dutch are known for their policy of tolerance towards what they consider victimless crimes, which are, in the case of Amsterdam, which most often mentioned, are the legalization of prostitution and the tolerant attitude towards the use of what they refer to as soft drugs, which in most cases means marijuana and hash. This is one of the things they're most known for. Now, you asked me about why should you visit Amsterdam. There are a lot of people who visit for those reasons. And to each their own, I guess. I'm going to try to adopt the Dutch policy of tolerance in this case. Most people who should visit there have to recognize, and will recognize within a day, that they are visiting a city that is essentially in and of itself a museum. It's got hundreds of great museums in it, but the city itself is a remarkable city. It has canals that run all the way through it. It's not like Venice where it's completely pedestrianized, but there are canals that run all the way through it. The city itself is actually below sea level, and there are reminders everywhere in the city of the fact of the importance of this city and the sea that is just 30 or 40 miles away. And it's vibrant, and it's got a great art scene and so much culture. It's just one of those places, when you mention the great cities of Europe, London, Paris, Rome, Amsterdam deserves to be mentioned right up there with the rest of those.
And I should say, it doesn't intimidate me anymore. So just for the record, having flown into Cairo at night or other places like that, it seems funny to me that it did. But it did, just being the first place on the continent.
I mean, if it was your first place overseas, I could very easily see that. I see that a lot from people there. You see a lot of people who come in, and my first experience in Amsterdam was part of a bus tour. And I know that a number of the people on the bus tour that I was with that year, that was their first overseas experience. And it's a lot to process. There's a lot going on around you. There's a lot that certain conservative cultures it's probably harder on them than I would say on other people.
Now, of course, most of that's only true if we go to the red light district, which is a relatively small portion of the city. How would you recommend we tackle the city? Where should we start?
Well, the biggest thing about Amsterdam is you have to decide what your priorities are. Mm-hmm. If you have a full week in Amsterdam, there are so many museums that you could take 2 full weeks and visit nothing but museums from open to close every night over the 2 weeks and still not cover all of them. There are just so many museums. What you'd want to do is you'd want to read about it and pick out the ones that are most interesting to you. And there are, of course, the ones that are most famous and the big ones. And what I tell people is if you're spending a week in Amsterdam, you could I would always set aside 2 days with the idea that you're going to visit museums, mostly because you're almost guaranteed to have 2 days in that week where it's going to rain most of the day.
Yes.
It's Northern Europe, and the weather is notoriously temperamental. It's funny, every podcast place we talk about, South Island, New Zealand, Michigan, Amsterdam, it's all temperamental weather. I get stuck in those places. But Amsterdam's no exception. And it does rain quite a bit. Of the days I've been there, it's rained on at least half of them. So it's good to set aside those museums. The big 3 museums are just outside the main canal belt. And the 3 museums are the Rijksmuseum, which is the main national museum, which the building in and of itself is a work of art. It looks similar to the Central Station where most people come in. Most people find their entrance to Amsterdam in Central Station. It's a very similar looking building, but very ornate with a lot of artwork on the outside. The second museum is the Van Gogh Museum, which is dedicated mostly to his work. And the third one is the Stedelijk Museum, which I know I'm going to massacre Dutch with how many times I've been there. I should be better at pronouncing these places.
Okay, you already massacred Van Gogh. So
yeah, Van Gogh there, yeah. Of the 3, I've been to all 3 multiple times, and I like all 3 a lot. If you visited all 3 in a day, it would probably occupy your whole day. The Rijksmuseum is massive and holds an amazing collection of mostly Dutch work, but other work from Northern Europe and other parts of the world.
Well, and mostly classic Dutch masters kind of works, and best known for the Night Watch, Night Watch,
yes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you'll find a lot of Rembrandt and a lot of the famous Dutch masters are in the Rijksmuseum.
Now, that would have still been, they were doing a renovation, so you didn't get to that this trip.
I did not. Just reopened them.
Just reopened now, right?
Just reopened. Same with the Van Gogh Museum. Van Gogh Museum was also under renovation when we were there, but the Rijksmuseum may just be opening soon. But
that one's opening, I think, this week.
Okay, the Van Gogh Museum then opened a couple weeks ago. Because while we were there, it was just getting ready to do its reopening as well. I have not seen either since they've been redone. The Van Gogh Museum I really liked a lot because, and I don't know if the new format's going to keep this, but I would imagine it would, and I hope it would because it was amazing, it was one of the few art museums dedicated to an artist where his works were displayed chronologically. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was very interesting with a guy like him because you watch his sort of descent into madness a little bit.
You had a similar experience at the Picasso Museum in Spain.
Okay.
And when you talk about somebody having a blue period, for instance, it's much more obvious when you walk into a room and all the paintings are the same color. And so arranging things chronologically made a significant difference in that particular place.
Yeah. I wish more of the museums that focus on artists did do that. I think it lends a lot of insight to their lives, other than being brilliant artists that you probably wouldn't get on a day-to-day. I know both the Matisse Museum and the Chagall Museum in Nice, when I visited there, they didn't follow that format, and they're great museums of their own, but it would have been nice. The third one is a Stedelijk Museum, which is the modern art museum. It's certainly the least visited of the bunch, and I really do think that people do miss it. Obviously, if I'm recommending, I'd recommend the other 2 first, but it's certainly a museum that is worth the time that you can dedicate to it. And it is mostly the modern art, and it's Dutch, mostly Dutch, but it does have a pretty diverse collection to it as well. Okay.
So we've got some museums kind of set aside for a rainy day, it sounds like is the plan here.
Sure. And the museums go on and on. Any Amsterdam guidebook, any Amsterdam site's going to list them. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of depth on them, but there is a museum dedicated to a house Rembrandt lived in and worked in, which is fascinating. There is the Amsterdam Historical Museum is a really brilliant collection and details the history of the country in a way where I think the wealth of the Dutch East India Company is lost on some people history-wise, but it certainly comes alive in the historical museum. There's an archaeological museum that's wonderful. There are some unique museums. I call them the Only in Amsterdam Museum collection, meaning and they are smaller, and the collection is what you think it would be, but it's typically Amsterdam, and in that there's a sex museum, an erotic museum, and a hash hemp marijuana museum. Again, all are smaller collections, but they're one of those places where you can go, yeah, that's an Only in Amsterdam thing. So, I mean, and there are probably 100 museums I didn't list here. there's something to appeal to everybody, and the best thing to do is to check it out. With the Amsterdam card, admission to many of these museums is free or included in it. In some cases, it provides big discounts. So get the Amsterdam card and then look through the information packet that comes with that and try to decide what appeals to you personally.
You get that from the tourist office?
Yeah, they call it the Fay, which is it's just VVV, and it's right in front of Central Station. There's one in the airport as well, and there are certain branches all over the city as well.
Okay.
That also includes a transit pass for the GVB company, which isn't all the buses, but it is the buses and some of the trams and everything. So it is a really good value. If you have it for a certain number of days, it allows you to use it when maybe the weather turns south.
Okay.
One of the biggest sites that almost everybody who goes to Amsterdam signs up to see is the Anne Frank house. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to assume everybody knows who Anne Frank is, but I would imagine most do. She was a young Jewish girl who lived in Amsterdam during the time of the Nazi occupation, and her family lived in one of these hidden dwellings being taken care of by local do-gooders, and she wrote a very famous diary. And her house is, I would say, probably the most popular tourist attraction in Amsterdam. The lines for the Anne Frank house are enormous. Now, you can buy your tickets in advance, which I cannot encourage strongly enough. You do not want to just show up there, especially during any time of year, and try to just get in line and wait. You'll wait hours in line and waste the rest of your time in the city. But if you know when you're going, buy your tickets in advance. It's gripping. It's a very sad part of history, but it's uplifting to see. It doesn't have a happy ending, spoiler alert, but it is one of those things that it's humanity, and it's a story that needs to be told, and it's told very well through the house itself. So it's one of the things definitely worth checking out.
And I have not been there because of the line, so I definitely would underline that is we did not plan ahead and therefore did not see the house. So
I did not go on this trip. I've been 2 or 3 other times, but the line was just amazing. There's a beautiful old church next to it called the Westerkerk, and it's not even the kind of thing where you can go and buy your tickets and explore the Westerkerk and the nearby Homo Monument, which Amsterdam also has a very tolerant policy towards gays, and they have a monument near this church that is dedicated to the persecution of homosexuals around the world. It's not like you can even get your tickets for the Anne Frank house and explore some of the nearby things. You have to stand in this enormous line. And it's one of those things everybody wants to see, and for good reason. So, yeah, do get your tickets in advance and try to get them far in advance. I looked while I was there thinking, maybe I'd like to check this out, and they were sold out for weeks. So I would definitely get your tickets in advance.
And you mentioned biking, talking about ways to get around in a city. Obviously, biking was one method that you used.
Yeah. I've rented you talk about being intimidated by Amsterdam. That first experience of biking in the city is one I'll never forget. There are trams running down a lot of the main roads. Now, it's a very bike-friendly city, and you can see it because there are bike lanes along all the roads. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I should say very, very important is when you go to cross a street, you've got to check your bike lanes, then your road, and then the bike lanes on the other side. I don't know how many times in my times there I've seen tourists just wander out in front of biking people because you're not used to looking for traffic in the bike lanes. It's the trams and the cars you're worried about, but people stepping out in front of, and the Dutch people use their bikes for everything. So people stepping out, and it's a lot of that, I'm sure, is people walking out of these marijuana coffee shops, not thinking correctly and stumbling into the bike lanes, which I've seen I don't know how many times Dutch people yelling at them for that. But it's just the normal tourists. Watch out for it. Biking in the city is great fun. I think everybody should try it. There are a number of bike companies. There are ones where you can rent them and take a tour where they lead you around the city to see the sights, or there are a number of places where you can rent it and just take it out on your own. I've done it both ways, and it's a very Dutch way of seeing the city. This time we rented them and went out on our own, and we just followed bike paths from one side of the city to the other. We went straight through the central part of the city, which is known as the Dam, which has the Royal Palace and the National Monument and the new church, which is chaotic and full of tourists. And then we found some really beautiful old canals out in both the eastern and western sides of the city where we were the only ones out there biking. And it's a great experience. I'd encourage everybody to try it. And if you're too intimidated to do it in the downtown area of Amsterdam, there's a lot of ways where these bike shops can show you ways to get out of the congested areas where you might feel more comfortable.
One thing I remember you talk about the Dutch and the bikes is the biking garage outside the main train station, which, as you mentioned, is very, very centrally located. Multi-level garage just stuffed with bikes. So quite a
Yeah.
lot of bikes in the city.
There are bikes chained to just about every canal bridge, and just about everything that's fixed in the city has a bike locked to it in some way. You hear a lot, and every place you rent a bike from is going to tell you the same thing. They're going to say you absolutely must lock your bike every time you leave it alone, and bike theft is a big problem in Amsterdam. I find that so hard to believe with the excess amount of bikes. I mean, I'm sure it's true, but with the excess amount of bikes that there are everywhere, I mean, they're just absolutely everywhere. And you got to wonder how many of these, it's been years since they've been used, and you can see them too. They're just rotting away attached to a bridge or something, but they use it as practical transportation. You'll see people with their dogs in a little bike basket. You'll see people carrying groceries or something that you would never expect to see on a bike. You'll see people biking around Amsterdam with it. So it's not just something it's not just a kitschy little thing. It's a real mode of transport for them.
Okay.
So,
And then I interrupted. You were talking about sites when I got us off onto bikes. So,
well, that's one of those experiences I had that written down as one of those experiences that you absolutely have to do. It's a good thing we mentioned that up front. As far as other sites go, there's a couple places that I like a lot that I think are not always the first place that people go. One of them is called the Bergenhof, which is a old Beguinage where it's Catholic women, nuns, who did not obviously take monastic vows, but they were devoted. And they used these small inner city courtyards, places of solitude, to take care of women and the elderly. And there is one of these that is still in Amsterdam. So much chaos. And to go to the Bergenhof and see the calm surrounded by this chaos, it gives you a real powerful image of what this place is. Inside this small Middle Ages era courtyard is two small churches and the oldest wooden house in Amsterdam. So you're able to see where these women would have taken care of the destitute and the elderly and the ill. And then you're also able to see these two beautiful churches that are in there. And it's off a court called Spui, which is spelled S-P-U-I, but I've been told that the U-I in Dutch is pronounced like the ow and cow. So Spui is the name of the court. And it's not far from the main dam area. It's just a short walk up from there. Finding your way into it's a little confusing. There's a big wooden door, and it has on the front of the name of the courtyard. And you could probably ask just about anybody, but it's certainly one of the places I send people first. Most people get off in Central Station and walk down one of the two main streets away from the train station, which is a frenetic activity. It has all this tourist stuff and hotels and street peddlers and all this activity. And then you walk a little bit further out, and I tell people to go there because they've had a chance to see the chaos of Amsterdam, and then they wander into this really spiritual place that has a lot of solitude. It's certainly unique from the rest of Amsterdam. And these small courtyards were all over the Low Countries. Belgium has a number of these in place. I know Bruges is well known for its courtyard as well, which is a short walk from the train station there in Bruges. Another place that I don't think it's recommended a lot is the Albert Kuipmarkt, which is out beyond the main canal ring, and it's a short walk from the museums area, and it is a local market. I spend a lot of time out there because I love the vast array of things you can get there. You can find Dutch cheeses and meats, and the few times I've been to Amsterdam, the 3 or 4 weeks where I've actually rented either an apartment or a houseboat and catered for myself, I would always go out there and buy your groceries. It's one of these local markets. It's frequented by people out there to get their everyday items and their groceries and stuff. And it's a wonderful look into Dutch life, which sometimes is hard to see in certain parts of Amsterdam. But this market's wonderful. And my last trip out there, my friend and I were out there wanted to see the sights a little bit and take some pictures of the market, but we ended up finding some great things to eat. She was able to find a really good waffle, the Belgian-style waffles with chocolate and just about anything you could want, and I was able to have churros. So there's a lot of food options, and it's one of the cheapest places that you'll find souvenirs as well. Besides being a local market, they have a number of very large souvenir shops, and Amsterdam has with its reputation, has some of the funniest. And it's one of those places you can buy souvenirs at and just delight the people that you give the keychains and the magnets and stuff like that. There's just so many funny little souvenirs that come from Amsterdam. So the Albert Kuipmarkt's a great place to find it. And then the other place I recommend that people at least look at, and this one I don't even think I need to recommend it, I think everybody goes, is the red light district itself. I don't think you need to spend a lot of time there. And usually I tell people, for me, if you're not somebody who's looking to really feel the party scene, the massive crowds that tend to go there later in the evening, say 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or after, I'd say 7 to 8 is a good time to walk around the red light district. It's something you need to see. It's this idea of legalized prostitution in this one small area. It's, again, we mentioned how intimidating it can be. It's mind-boggling for most people. I've heard people refer to it. I can't think of a description I haven't heard of the red light district. Some people say it's sad. Some people say it's unique. Some people say it's a good way of looking at things. Everybody's got their own opinion on it, but it's something you want to see. The most shocking thing, and I want to prepare people in advance, is the prostitutes have these windows that they stand behind, and people just come up and talk to them. And I think that's probably the thing that is hardest for people who haven't seen it or been prepared for it to accept and understand. The rest of the red light district things to see there's everything you can imagine. There are sex shops selling pornography and every other kind of thing you can imagine in sex shops. And then also there are these sex shows, clubs that have big gaudy advertisements out front, and those are unavoidable. The thing about the red light district that is most dumbfounding, I think, to people is it has some of the most gorgeous architecture in the entire city. But when with all the other things I just described, who's noticing it? There's a fantastic, huge, absolutely massive church down there called the Old Kirk, which is the old church. There's also, in a small canal house on the northern end of the red light district heading towards Central Station, there is one of these hidden churches. From when the Protestants took over, they obviously banned other religions, and there was a need for some of these churches to go underground. And there's this fantastically ornate church in a canal house there called Our Lord in the Attic. It's interesting in such a tolerant, open city to see something that had to be hidden at one point in time. And it's a museum now, and a very interesting place in and of itself. And a lot of the row houses everywhere in Amsterdam, there's these long row houses, and they all have these gables on tops. And the most famous one, I think, is the step gable, which just looks like steps up the top of the building. And there are also rounded gables and many different kinds. But most of the most beautiful gables and some of the most beautiful sculpture on houses is right down there in the red light district. So if you're interested in architecture but you're intimidated by the red light district, go down there at 10 in the morning. The scene is not crazy at 10 or 11 in the morning, and you can see this old church, and you can see Our Lord in the Attic, and you can see a lot of the gorgeous, and the canals down there are also very pretty, a little bit dirtier than other parts of the city, but gorgeous. But it's a place that shouldn't just be skipped because, well, I don't approve of any of that, I'm not into any of that. It's something that if you don't at least see it, you're probably not getting the full picture of Amsterdam. I'm not saying you have to get involved in any of it, but you should probably see it.
Excellent. What should we see next?
There are a couple things I recommend about Amsterdam. That the Netherlands are known for flowers. And there are three things in particular, one in Amsterdam, one just outside, and one that's a little further afield. I recommend that have to do with flowers. The Coconut Gardens is the far one, and that is the National Gardens of the Netherlands, and it's about a 15-minute train ride to Schiphol, the airport, and then another 30-minute bus ride. But it is only in season from mid-March to mid-May. Now, we were there near the end of April this year, and usually that would be prime tulip season, and the fields would be full of color and tulips. Well, they had the longest, coldest winter that anybody can remember in Northern Europe. And when we got to the Coconut, the only tulips we saw were actually inside the exposition halls, where usually you'd see in fields worth. I just saw a bunch of bloggers who were there this past week, and they were lucky enough to see the tulips in full bloom, except that the gardens are getting ready to close. So it was a very odd season this year. So again, if you're there from mid-March to mid-May, that's definitely something you'd want to check out. And then the Tourist Information Office in Amsterdam sells passes and transportation combo tickets that you can use to get out to the gardens there. The one that's in Amsterdam is there's a touristy type flower market about halfway between Central Station and Leidspleen, which is one of the main squares. And it's another place where you can get a little bit of a glimpse. It's a very touristy place, but if that's all you're going to be able to do is get to see something about the flowers in Holland, that's a good place to go because they sell the bulbs there. And it's also, if you're not going to make it out to the market I described, it's another good place to possibly find your souvenirs. There are, as well as flower shops, there's a really good cheese shop down there where you can sample some of the Dutch cheeses, and it's a very touristy place again. So it's not too authentic, but if that's the best you're going to do, then that's something you should check out. The one place I recommend that is a hard sell for people, and I've recommended this probably 100 times, and I only know of a couple other people who've done it, and it's called the Ellesmere Flower Auction. The reason people don't get to this, quite honestly, is because the bulk of the action at this flower auction takes place between 7 and 11 a.m.
Oh, that's not too bad. I thought you were going to say 5. Okay.
Well, no, but it's about an hour bus ride out.
Okay.
So it does require getting up and getting ready at your hotel at 5:30, getting the bus from Central Station at 6, and being out there at 7. But it is so worth it. What it is, it's this enormous facility, probably the size of 3 or 4 dome stadiums in the U.S., a massive facility with just these moving carts worth of flowers from all over Holland, from greenhouses, from the fields, whatever. And then there are these 2 auction halls where they have these gigantic clocks on the wall. And then the clocks display all kinds of information about the flowers, where they were grown, the grower, the type of soil used. They're very distinct. And the auction halls have these long, it's like an auditorium, and the bidders from all over Europe sit with their laptops or with a specially designed system that they have there and bid on these large batches of flowers. The auction halls themselves are fascinating. Watching the little carts move around. My friend who was with me described it as almost like a Disney movie, watching these little teeny carts. They're bigger than a moped, like a stand-up moped, but they're towing around these flowers everywhere, and it's frenetic activity. She said it almost looked like a scene out of the movie Cars. It's very unique, and it's something that it's early in the morning, I understand, but there's a large catwalk above the facility. And they have information boards in all kinds of different languages, so you're able to walk around above the action and see these people at work towing the flowers around. Once they're bid on, they're put on a truck, and it's an amazing place. It is pretty easy to get there. You have to take a bus, Connection Bus 172. But again, the Tourist Information Office, which isn't open at 6 a.m., so get your tickets the day before. They can sell you the bus pass to get out there and everything. And the bus driver, you just let the bus driver know where you're going. And it's a real simple thing to do.
Excellent. You were there for the 8th time, 9th time?
Yeah, somewhere. I mean,
and the city is much the same as it's been the other 7 times. Did anything surprise you this time?
No. I guess the biggest surprise is how little it changed. But again, I kind of anticipated that. From what I understand, they have gone through efforts to make the red light district feel safer. And I will say that they did succeed on that. When I was there in the late 90s and early in the 2000s, there were a lot more guys selling hard drugs who we called them the Coke Speed Ecstasy guys. They would walk right up to you and say that in about 30 different languages. And that gave it they gave it even a seedier feel. And I didn't get that sense from it this time. I do think that they've gone out of their way to shore that up a little bit. And I know that they've closed a bunch of coffee shops. They're trying to encourage less drug tourism.
Well, and at one point they were even flirting with, and I think they did ban drug tourism for a while, but I think that didn't stick, is my recollection of that.
Well, it was never going to fly in Amsterdam.
Well, it wasn't that they were closing down the drug trade of soft drugs. It's just that they were going to require you to show that you were a citizen.
Right. From what the last I read and people I talked to over there, I believe that's still the case outside of Amsterdam. That you still need some sort of membership card or something like that outside of Amsterdam. Now, Amsterdam, it just wouldn't fly. That's all there is. That city. And yeah, there's a huge market for that. And that's part of Amsterdam, which is why one thing I wanted to mention very quickly, and this is probably the oddest advice for a city that you do a podcast on. One of my best advices on Amsterdam is get out of Amsterdam.
Well, see, that advice I've taken.
Yeah. Well, the reason I say this is because it's not meant to say anything bad about Amsterdam, but I would hate for people to have their whole impression
Of the Netherlands be Amsterdam,
of
sure.
the Netherlands
Yeah.
based on what you see in Amsterdam.
Hmm.
Because there is a country, there's a bigger country out there, and it's certainly a lot more tame in a lot of ways, and certainly a lot more down to earth. The Dutch are just wonderful people and so remarkably intelligent. I mean, if you meet a Dutch person who doesn't speak not only English and two other languages, that's a bit of a surprise. They're just they're marvel linguists.
There's a new ad campaign from the tourism board in Holland. That basically it's the original "cool" is the ad campaign, and I'll link to the video in the show notes for it. It's funny. They did a good job with it, but they say everybody speaks English, and then they have one guy who's speaking Dutch, and they basically label him as the one guy who doesn't speak English. But
Right. I mean, it's amazing.
it's funny because it's so true. Yes,
It is, and it's not just that you can always find somebody to help you find a bathroom. It's you can have a conversation with almost anybody. It's remarkable.
Well, what we noticed is when you rent a car and turn on the radio, almost all of the music was in English. There aren't as many people writing songs in Dutch, and so people are being exposed just very constantly to English. So yes, very, very proficient in the language from that point of view.
Very, very much so. And that holds even outside of Amsterdam as well. I mentioned get out of Amsterdam. The Netherlands itself is wonderful. There's so many great destinations that could be a whole nother podcast. And I'm not going to get into that, but I wrote down 4 places that are within an hour via bus or train from Amsterdam that I think people would enjoy as a nice day trip. And they are Haarlem, Utrecht, Alkmaar, and Volendam. Haarlem is probably the closest and easiest accessible of these. It's a 15-minute train ride from Central Station. The book The Hiding Place took place there. The Corrie ten Boom House is it's a similar story to Anne Frank, another hidden place. And Corrie ten Boom House is a museum there.
Well, and the difference is that Anne Frank's family was being hidden and Corrie ten Boom's family was doing the hiding.
Exactly.
And both went to concentration camps. Anne Frank obviously died in the concentration camp, and Corrie ten Boom's family died, but she survived and then wrote a book about their experiences hiding their Jewish neighbors because they thought it was wrong, obviously. Yep. So,
yeah, and it also is wonderful and well done. The thing I like most about Haarlem is Amsterdam's like most big cities, and a lot of European big cities tend to be a little dirty in places, and they're old. They're old cities. It's not. I'm not criticizing. It's just that's what happens when you get to be an older city. They're a little unpolished around the edges in some places, a little run down. Haarlem's this typical little Dutch town. It doesn't have the drug tourism. It's just a quaint little town. It's got a nice cathedral in the middle, and that certainly is a big part of it. The second smallest town is Utrecht, which is a university town, which is about 30 minutes by train south of Amsterdam.
And you say small towns, these are really small cities, both of the two that you've named so far.
Okay. Exactly. Yeah. None of these are little country towns. I mean, it's a country with a very high population density. So they are small cities. Utrecht's a college city, and it's got a vibrant feel, good pubs, good cafes. Another place, it's got a great church that you can climb to the top of and look out over the city and the canals and everything. The third one I mentioned is Alkmaar. That's about a little over an hour north, which has a cheese market once a week where they carry the cheese around on the traditional Dutch way, which is these long poles and these swinging apparatuses that go between them with the perfectly round wheels of cheese stacked up all over the place. I believe it's on Fridays, but I didn't get a chance to check into that. That's one thing, and that's all be very touristy and very crowded. The fourth place I mentioned is Volendam, which is a sort of traditional Dutch fishing village. Volendam, the other 3 you take a train to. Volendam's one you take a bus to. And the thing I remember about Volendam is there's a lot of little seafood stands all over the place. And you sort of walk along the main drag and you just order seafood from these little seafood stands, and they put it in a larger paper cup and you just use a toothpick to eat it right there. The seafood is certainly excellent. So that's my advice, is to give yourself a better picture of the Netherlands by getting out to one of these small little day trip towns.
I'm going to throw in one there, and that is the town of Edam, which is also fairly close to Amsterdam, just north of Amsterdam there.
And Amsterdam and Edam on the same trip.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just a picturesque, beautiful little town, couple windmills, couple canals, very pretty town. Wouldn't take but an hour to walk the whole town, but just picture perfect. And as you say, once you get away from the kind of grittiness of Amsterdam, you get Dutch clean for me, which is not just not dirty, but I've never seen so many people washing windows. So
Yeah, and that's exactly. And Edam's great because you can go there and you can rent a bike in Edam and bike to Markham or to Volendam. These are two small fishing villages, and you could spend your day. That's a great place to bike, especially if you're too intimidated to try it in Amsterdam. It's a low, flat country. It
Right,
can't
right.
be any perfect for biking. You're not worried about going up and down hills or anything. You're just biking from place to place. I know a lot of people who bike from Amsterdam to Haarlem. 15-minute train ride, an hour and a half bike. It's
Excellent.
certainly very easy to do that. You want to talk about food?
Yeah, let's talk about food. I was just looking at my question.
Well, you can get anything you want in Amsterdam, pretty much.
In so many ways.
Yeah, in so many ways. And the food is just one of those. A blogger I like a lot, who I'll keep nameless because he confessed today that his first experience with fries and mayo was he'd had a little too much to drink, which is the only way he was able to get himself to try the French fries and mayo for the first time. And he said it was actually better than he thought. And you think of fries and mayo and you're like, this doesn't sound appealing at all. And the first 2 or 3 times I was in Amsterdam, I don't eat mayo on much stuff here in the U.S. There's no way I'm eating it on fries. It took me a while, but boy, every time I'm there now, the fries and the mayo. And there's a great stand out by Spau, the court I talked about that has the Besenhof right off of it. It's a place that does the fries, and not only do they have the mayo available, they have about 25 other sauces. So this is a very typically Dutch thing to do, is have your fries and mayo. So obviously that doesn't close down our food section, because if that's all they're known for cuisine-wise, we're in trouble. But the big thing, that's one of the big snacks, and you'll see everybody eating it. As far as Dutch food, you'll have to kind of search out traditional Dutch food. There are some restaurants that do it there. Dutch food is more veggie and less meat. And as much as I hate recommending it, there's a wonderful page on Wikipedia of all places that does a great job of explaining what the traditional Dutch cuisines are. I'm not going to try to do that, because if you want to eat traditional Dutch cuisine in Amsterdam, there are 4 or 5 restaurants that have a good reputation for it. And honestly, that's really it. You're really going to have to search it out if you want traditional Dutch cuisine. What Amsterdam food-wise is known for now is the absolutely dumbfounding array of ethnic foods that are available. Obviously, with the Dutch East India Company being so influential in the history of the country, there are a number of Asian restaurants, cuisines that are available from those areas, most notably the Indonesian rice table, the Indonesian restaurants, which the rice table is this circular table that you turn, and it has different dishes on it. It's meant to be shared amongst a group of people. It is a real experience. Be careful of the curry sauce. It will scald your mouth. I found that out the hard way. But the meal itself is wonderful and on the more expensive side, but again, one of these experiences I can't recommend enough. In and of itself, it's just an experience.
And before I want to calibrate that being hot, because you're from the Midwest. So do you generally eat spicy?
Not incredibly spicy, but I know what incredibly spicy is.
Okay.
And this is as hot as anything I've ever had. Yeah, it's as hot as Indian food. Okay. Easily. This is one particular sauce that it looked like the liquefied red of a candy cane, I guess I would say, that's how to describe it is. And it was just, for days I felt like I had scalded my palate. But you can ask them for different levels. They obviously see tourists all the time, so you can ask them for different levels of hot and whatnot, and they'll point out what's hot and spicy. And the second time I went and had the Indonesian rice table, I made sure I asked what was hot and what wasn't. So I was a little better prepared the second time through. The second cuisine that you'll see a lot of is Brazilian steakhouses, and those do fantastic job of steaks and similarly meat-based meals. But on top of that, seafood, obviously a country where the sea is as vital to the country as it is in Amsterdam and the Netherlands in general, is going to be good with seafood. And seafood's expensive as well, as it is in most places, even if it's a national cuisine form. But the seafood dishes are phenomenal and well worth checking out. So those are the 3 biggies. But I've seen Cambodian restaurants, Nepalese restaurants, Mexican, anything you're looking for, you're going to find there. And you just have to find out. We ate at a Greek restaurant this time, and yeah, just pretty much anything you could want, you're going to find. A lot of the biggest variety of them probably around the court I called Leidsplein, which is the one of the main areas that has cafes and restaurants around. It's a center for nightlife as well.
Okay, excellent. Most memorable local you met?
I'll just stick to this trip because recalling the hundreds of people I've met there. I had a very eccentric owner of a houseboat I rented once. He wanted to know what we were into specifically and wanted to give us a breakdown. He initially assumed since we were younger we were there for the activities of the red light district, so he started going into great detail about all the things we could find there, which we weren't really there for that, but did find the whole explanation very amusing. He spoke 10 different languages.
Oh, my.
Because he was renting out his houseboat to so many different people, and he'd become so good at being able to explain the city to people. He had been in the Dutch military for a while and had traveled all over the world, and he was just fascinating. That was a previous guy. This last trip I met a bartender who was also fascinating, and I think he spoke 7 languages. And in the time I sat talking to him, it was at a great beer bar there called Gollum, which is right by Spau as well. They have a lot of great Belgian beers and a good Dutch selection and everything. He knew his beer real well, but in the time I was there, I saw him converse to people in at least 4 different languages, not just giving them an idea of beer in 4 languages, but able to have conversations. And him and I talked politics a little, which, as I mentioned in the New Zealand podcast, a lot of times travelers don't, unless there's something going on politically that dominates the headlines, you're not often aware of how the locals feel. And he gave me a lot of insight on local Dutch politics, which I found, which was interesting.
Excellent. You're standing in the prettiest spot in all of Amsterdam. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
The canal scenes at night. The canals at night the bridges are all lit up, and the canals at night are just gorgeous. I always tell people to, no matter what you're doing, make sure you get out into more of the Western Canal Belt. There's an area out there called the Jordan, which is like the word Jordan, but spelled with an extra A. It's a very residential area, and there are a lot of just gorgeous canals that are lit up at night. It's just beautiful the way they light up, and if the weather's participating nicely, it makes great strolling. So definitely the canal belt at night, especially away from the bright lights of the busier, more touristy areas.
Excellent. And you thought that one was easy. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Amsterdam.
Oh, let's stop and do part 2 just on this one. I'm going to take the easy way out here and say I'm not even going to try to come up with one, but the people, especially the people who you can tell went there for drug tourism, there's such a mosaic of them, and they're so unique. You get your image from the 70s America or from the Caribbean Islander there's so many diverse types of people there, and you look at them and say, yep, that's the person who is here for this. It's an old sort of only in Amsterdam thing. There's so many only in Amsterdam scenes.
So you're saying the 60s aren't dead, they just moved to Amsterdam.
Yeah, well, they moved to certain areas of Amsterdam and certain brains of Amsterdam. There's so many unique things, and like I mentioned, some of the souvenirs are just so wildly inappropriate, but so funny.
Yeah, I noticed you weren't getting really specific with that.
No,
I
want you to keep your clean rating.
Thank you.
I'm not going to go into depth with it, but. And my blog is sort of family friendly too. I mean, I think the only person who reads my blog is my mom, so I'm not going to do a very graphic post there on some of the stuff we took pictures of. But anybody who wants to know what's funny about it, I did bring back some very amusing pictures of, let's just put it this way, things shaped in chocolate you wouldn't really imagine are things you'd see shaped in chocolate, except maybe a bachelor and bachelorette party. So,
all right.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much of that. Whether you're smoking dope or not, you're going to laugh a lot. It's a city with a good sense of humor about itself. And that's nice to see. It really is. It's refreshing. So a lot of cities take themselves very seriously, and Amsterdam is not afraid to make fun of itself.
So before we get to our last 2 questions, one more thing you think people should know before they go to Amsterdam?
One more thing I think I didn't mention that I probably should is it's great. You should always, at some point in time, try to see the city from the water. There are a number of canal cruises. There are canal cruises for any interest. You want to sit on a boat and drink beer with the top down and slowly cruise through. You want to cruise the red light district and get a tour of that. You want anything you want. There's a way for you to see the city from the water, which again is so important to the makeup and the history of the city that I would say make sure you do that. There are really touristy ones right in front of Central Station, and you can do them cheap or you can do them expensive. You can have full 5-course meals on boats, whatever. But make sure you get down on the water and see the city from there. During the summer, you can actually rent the kind of boats, the little paddle boats.
Paddle boats. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which are unique and sometimes frustrating to maneuver. And if it's 80 degrees, which it's not always, if it's 80 degrees up on the surface where you're walking around on the streets and stuff, and it's not a windy day, it'll be 90 in the canal. So just be forewarned that it's a little bit warmer and a little bit swampier down there. So, but it's still a fun activity. You got to get on the water, got to see the city from there if you want a good idea of what the city's like.
Excellent. Finish the sentence. You really know you're in Amsterdam when
you've just walked out of a museum containing some of the greatest art you've ever seen to see a scruffy, long-haired guy wearing an American flag shirt run into a Dutch tourist because he's had a little too much to smoke.
You prepared for that one, didn't you?
No, I'm trying to recall the most common image I think I've seen there. Having stupid tourist collisions are one of the biggest things. Oh, and we mentioned biking. Just let me say one thing real quick. If you're biking in the city, don't let it intimidate you, but do not bike straight up streets that have tram lines. Do not bike in the middle of them because the tires of the bike can get caught there. So try to keep them the opposite way of the tram lines. I've seen a bunch of people wipe out that way too. Just do the opposite way of the trams.
And I would have thought that you're standing in front of a great big sign that says Amsterdam might also be obvious because they have the great big letters, the 6 feet tall that I see everyone take their picture in front of.
I Amsterdam, yeah.
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, yeah. Well, we got there in the afternoon the first day, and there were 200 people. I'll send you 2 different pictures. One of when we first got there, the 200 people, everyone trying to get the perfect picture of Amsterdam. It's right by the Rijksmuseum, right by the museum.
Exactly.
And then the one that I got that night after I helped the bartender close that Cafe Gollum, which is another story. I walked back around 2 a.m. past it, and it was me and a small handful of other tourists. So I was able to get a beautiful shot of the whole sign, which is hard to do. But yeah, that is a typically Amsterdam image as well.
Excellent. If you had to summarize Amsterdam in just 3 words, what 3 words would you pick?
Culture, enigmatic, and fun.
Excellent. Well, Erik, thanks so much for coming back on the show. I think we're going to have to retire your number at this point. I think 6 is the limit. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure we'll have you back on sometime. Thanks so much for giving us your view of the city of Amsterdam.
I appreciate you having me back, and it's fine because I don't know that I'll find any place new anytime soon that you haven't covered already. You're doing a good job of covering the world, Chris.
I received a nice note in the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler recently from, and I'm going to say Jacyn, it's Jacyn, but you know how to pronounce it if this is you. Hey, Chris, just wanted to say I love your podcast. I listen at work on my phone, so it's fun to travel the world every day. DH and I will be going to Paris for my Big 50. I'm making a list of where I would like to go next. Not that I'll ever get to go, but a girl can dream. Prague is on the top of my list. Thank you for all the time and effort. Prague is indeed a lovely place, although I'm going to recommend not December. It's gorgeous in December, and the Christmas markets are fun, but it is cold. I also heard from Jim, who left a comment on the recent episode on Slovenia. We listened to this podcast and your earlier number 162 podcast on Slovenia. We're looking forward to it, but our travel style is a little closer to the first guy, and the first guy in this case was Shel Holtz from For Immediate Release podcast, than to the second. And the second one was Michael Sonchina, and I just met Michael at the TBEX conference, the Travel Blog Exchange conference. The Rick Steves tour leaves you with some free time to explore on your own, so I hope to get to some of the places your guests mentioned. We'll be there in October, so no beach. Excellent, and I love to hear when people are using the podcast to actually either plan their travels or enhance their travels. I did that myself just recently. I was in Toronto for the TBEX conference, and as I was doing the bus tour of the city, I was listening to the episode on Toronto and trying to see if we had missed any place. And I, for one, found it useful. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.